Welcome to Queerly Speaking. I'm your host, Nat Jones, and together my wife and I will navigate the complex intersections of faith, identity, love, and resilience. In each episode, we'll share stories of heartbreak, healing, and hope from individuals who were told they didn't belong in the very spaces that shaped us.
How are you feeling, babe? Big success from week one.
Yeah, really good feedback, and I appreciate it. So many heartfelt, just like messages from friends and who know the kind of a high level part of my story, but maybe didn't know some of the details and all of that. So that definitely for the first time, that was very appreciative on my part. Yeah,
for sure. We just moved into our house, maybe almost 3 months ago now.
Yes.
2.5-ish.
Yep.
So we don't really have furniture. Obviously, we don't have a podcast space. So we're kind of bouncing around different parts of our house just to figure out what feels comfortable and what works. So we would love feedback on that as well.
But also don't judge us if it looks odd, because these are two of the only chairs we have for now.
Feedback, but be kind. Maybe send it offline. But we did just want to say, I think both of us wanted to say, obviously the topics of this podcast in general are going to be pretty heavy. Your story of a lot of challenges and things that you face, which are things no one should face, but also miraculous, kind of how you've come through all that and the person you are today. But this week specifically, we wanted to give a little trigger warning that we are going to have a conversation around suicide. That's pretty heavy. It's going to be heavy for me to sit here and listen, but I know that can be hard for a lot of people. So just keep that in mind as you go in to listen. If that's too much for you, we totally understand. Can't promise it'll be that much lighter next week, but we'll catch you when we can, and we appreciate your support.
Yeah. No, I think that's important. Everyone's at a different place in their life, so I think it's really important to just have a clear understanding of where you're at and what feels like a conversation that you can bear. So wanted to let you know.
For sure.
Yeah.
For sure.
Oh, man. Okay. So, in week one, we kind of went over overview, very high level, kind of how I grew up, and obviously being gay, being in the church, all of that stuff. But I wanted to kind of back up a little bit and talk about kind of the age group of like 8 to 14, 15. Obviously, those years of your life are really important because you're figuring out who you are. You're watching your parents. You're learning how to think for yourself. All of the above. So there was a lot that happened really for me in that period of time that I think shaped some of the. It created resiliency for sure, but it also shaped some of the later struggles that I would have in life with fear and depression and different things like that. So I wanted to kind of take a little bit of a deeper dive into what that was like for me.
Yeah, I think why don't you start at the beginning? I mean, last week we kind of talked generally about your upbringing and the church and all of that, but earliest memories as a kid, I mean, kind of paint the picture for us.
Yeah. So I loved music from really the time that I can remember. There are home videos of me like banging on pots and pans and singing. And I think probably for every year at Christmas, my parents got us some sort of like mic or instrument, and we were always just like making noise. And my grandfather, who I was absolutely closest to, was really there a lot of the time in those videos, just like singing along and kind of cheering us on. So there really are like, and that's the part that I kind of struggle with, because when I look back, yes, there are some like really heavy, negative, terrible things that happened. And then there are also like fantastic memories that I have as a child, my parents and my brothers and sisters. And for example, when we were little, I think this picture probably happened when I was around like 5. There were, like I said last week, there were 5 of us all together. And my youngest sister, I still have a relationship with to this day. I'm going to talk about her a little bit, and then I hope she comes on the podcast with us, but I think she will. And so Anyway, so it was like Father's Day, and we like made breakfast for my dad. My dad was a big breakfast guy, and we made breakfast for him, and my parents had a king size bed. And this is what I kind of talk about even with you. And we have this picture of us like all just like being in the bed. There's like 7 people in the bed, right? With all of the kids. And we got him, for those of you who are born in the 80s or early 90s, you'll remember Burger King did like this little like king hat, and you would put it together.
Oh, yeah. I remember
Yeah.
those. I remember
Yeah.
those.
Yeah. So anyway, and so we got one of those for my dad, yeah. So there's tons of memories like that. Like I've never doubted once that my parents loved me. They don't know how to love me. They don't know how to accept like who I am, if that makes sense. So it's complicated.
Yeah.
It's very complicated.
I think you have such an interesting situation in that where there's tons of people who don't have great relationships with their parents, and I think the classic stories they like always didn't, right? Growing up, they weren't close with them. They had kind of a tumultuous time with their family, and then they grow up and they cut them off, for whatever reason that may be. And I think it's so interesting, and in my opinion, it must be that much harder when you had such a positive relationship and they were good parents to you in your life and only aren't for something that you can't change. I mean, I just can't imagine.
Well, and that's the thing I think about parents, right? A bunch of our friends are parents. And even when they were listening last week, like the things that they picked out of what we talked about, and when I said, I'm like, oh, that's interesting. That's not the thing that I would have gathered from that, but they would have, they picked up on something different because they're raising kids. And hopefully we will be as soon as well. Yeah. But they're raising kids, so they picked up on different things. And the truth is that there's no parent that's perfect at all. And that's why I'm such a really huge believer in it, making sure you go to the therapy that you need to, and you really work through the traumas and the things that you need to, because otherwise those things are going to impact your children in more ways than you could ever understand. And we see it. We see it with people that they've really not dealt with the things from their own childhood and their own early adulthood, and that fear comes out on their kids, and you see the ripple effect. And my story is very similar to that, and with my parents' fear, or my parents, whatever, they did not grow up in the type of church that they raised us in. They did not at all. That was when they were in college, they were kind of exposed to that. So yeah, lots of different dynamics. But I will say that from early on in my life, and I still do believe to this day that I had very spiritual experiences. I think for kids, you're not trying to apply logic to everything. Right. And so the way that you experience spirituality and God and the world and the people around you, I think can be magical and different. And it's not until you get older and you're like, you start questioning yourself and everything else.
You become a skeptic, yeah.
Yeah, you become very skeptical. That's a good way to say it. But being 7 and 8, 9, that's really when I start to remember that things changed for me. And obviously, I noted to it last week, but dealing with trauma from an external source that I couldn't control also left a lot of trauma, which I think added to the fear that I experienced as a kid. Most people that know me today, they're like, oh yeah, she's, outgoing and driven, and wouldn't associate the word shy with me. But when I was a child, I was shy. And I was very reserved. And the fear that I experienced was debilitating. And because I grew up in church, I knew, all these songs and all of this different stuff. And I connected to that. When I started talking a little bit ago and talking about music, I connected. When I think of spirituality, music is so much a part of that, that I can't separate the two at all. And with everything going on, the loneliness as a child, not having these things happen to you and not understanding and not knowing what to do, and then going through feeling like it's your fault, and there's just so many things that are happening and you are isolated. You have no one to talk to. And I did okay during the day, as a kid. I was playing outside, very active, all of that. But it was when it was time to go to bed, and and I almost like could not bear it. It was like when the lights would be turned off, like I would start to like just panic. And so early on, sorry, I haven't talked about this in this much depth. And I remember like the kind of fear that shows up in your body, that like the best way I know how to describe it is that it's like paralyzing. And I would just feel like I'm like glued to my bed, and all I could think is to sing. And so there was all these songs that we would sing in church, like "Grace is sufficient for me." I don't even honestly remember all the lyrics at this point. And songs about faithfulness, and I would just lay there and sing whatever song I could think of that we had sung in church. And I'm still bad at lyrics to this day, so they probably weren't even the right lyrics, but I knew the tune.
Beautiful voice.
And I would lay there and I would sing until I would fall asleep. And this went on for years. Like this was just ongoing, like excruciating fear. And yeah, you hit 9, 10, 11, 12, like that's also when all the conversations started happening of, well, your body's going to be changing. And then I'm like, oh my God, I'm going to get boobs, which on a deeper level meant in my mind, now I'm even more vulnerable. And so developing like this, it was almost like a hatred for being a woman, because women, in my mind, could easily be taken advantage of. And I wanted to be strong, and I wanted to be independent, and I wanted to be able to protect myself and others and everything else. So, and I think back to those times like where, I would get up the next morning and go on. I would, do my chores, would go to church. I'd do all the things. And and I think it's so important that as parents, we pay really close attention to the behaviors and changes in behavior and different things for our kids, because the internal war that I had most of my childhood, like I desperately needed help with that. And I didn't have any help. And, well, let me preface, my parents were getting me help, but not the help I needed. That's where it was like the conversion therapy or deliverance or some sort of other church developed, some sort of healing ministry. But in the church, you don't talk about depression, you don't talk about anxiety. That's a demon that has to be like, you have to be delivered from. Like, no joke. That is not, you don't talk about mental health.
Never any talk about that when you were growing up as a kid. I mean, when you were sad, I mean, surely there were days, right, where you were not yourself. I mean, was that something that was just pushed past? Everyone just ignored it, went on business as usual? Was that a situation where your parents would direct you, to pray more? I mean, I'm not to make light of it, but how were those days? I mean, if you saw your parents upset or your siblings, like what did you guys do?
Well, I think it depends. I think, like, I do remember having conversations with my parents, for sure. It was more like, okay, well, yeah, when you're sad, or what are you sad about? Okay, and then but it would always end in like, let's pray for you. It was always something typically that you needed to be healed from or delivered from. So like we had on Friday nights, when we were a part of this church that my parents helped start in the 90s, and we called it the Friday Night School of the Holy Spirit. So every Friday night we had a church service, and there'd be laying on of hands and praying for people, and a lot of it was like to deliver people from demons. So homosexuality is considered a demon that you need to be delivered from, or depression, anxiety. Yeah, so it was always really revolving around, well, let's pray through that. Let's, and they had prayer chains and all this other stuff. It's not like there wasn't effort put in. It just was like not in a way that helps anyone.
But you couldn't, I mean, could you seek resources that were outside of the church? Was
No.
there ever talk about, let's go to a counselor,
Well, the counselor was
was someone in church?
Yes, we had to go to like Christian counselors. And in fact, in my teenage years, when they were like really desperately trying to find a solution to my gayness, I went to one counselor, and they had said on there that she was Christian, and she told my parents after talking to me that maybe they need to let me be gay. Mm-hmm. And they were like, absolutely not. And we never saw her again. So no, there weren't resources like that. Everything was in the church, surrounded around the church. And yeah, I mean, it's just, and especially for things like fear, right? Fear is something that like the devil or the enemy is putting in your life, or, it's literally all surrounded around God and the devil. And you get, hope from one and fear from the other.
I want to go back and ask a question if I can, and we can certainly edit any of this out. But when you talk about, oh my gosh, it's kind of hard to speak. I'm feeling so sad for you, and I'm furious, to be honest. But when you talk a little bit about, the fear from things that you've experienced, did you not feel like you could go, and I ask this so delicately because I know that it's so complex, and people ask for help or any of that is something I couldn't wrap my head around, and it's not for me to speak to. But did you feel like your parents were someone that you could trust, that you could try to go to for help? Or did you feel like were you already, I guess, fighting kind of challenges from thinking you were gay and not wanting to step on toes with your parents? Did they not feel safe? I mean, can you just talk?
Yeah, no, that's a good question.
A little bit about that?
It's extremely confusing because there's so many things happening at one time. One being taken advantage of. And I do want to make it clear once again that was no one in my immediate family. That was not my parents. It was an external source that was around. So there's just so many layers, I think, that created barriers and blockages, because I do think that my parents have asked me that a million times, but there's so much manipulation that happens with that. And it really fucks with your mind so much that as a child, you're so vulnerable to something like that anyway. And then to have that happen on top of it, it's just really confusing. So
you don't know probably what to say. I mean, right? When you're young, your intuition or knowledge of right and wrong and trusted people versus not trusted people. I mean, I can imagine it's all so muddy,
Yeah.
Like that's exactly what you're saying. Our jobs when we become parents or people we know is to be vigilant. I mean, you have to be those eyes because they don't have the tools.
Yeah. And I really think that probably from around that age, it created so many layers of fear and confusion for the future. Especially as I got older. I think that's I don't know if I answered your question all the way. But yeah, there was so much manipulation in that I felt like I would either ruin everything, or it was something that I had done and I was going to get in trouble because it was something that that I had somehow invited or created or all of that. And as a child, you don't even, you can't even put words to all of that. You just know that you're like, I don't like it. I don't like that. Now, as I got older, it got even more complicated, right? Because then I am going through puberty and having different types of feelings like, okay. It's starting to clarify because like I said in last week's episode, the only way that I could kind of describe it is I wanted to be a dude. I wanted to be a guy because guys liked girls. And so when I started getting a little bit older, I knew that I didn't want to be a boy. I knew that I didn't have some of the...
Like a gender dysphoria.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And so then I started to realize it's there's, a different thing for that.
And I had to imagine that you probably weren't exposed.
Oh my God, no.
To that. I mean, right? We have so much language, thank God, pansexual and bisexual and fluid and all those things that even have obviously always been around and should have been treated as such, but we just didn't have the language, I think, to understand, or maybe we weren't respectful of the language that was being used to understand all that. So I can imagine it's very confusing.
Yeah, so many layers, right? You've got then anything that I was exposed to, usually it was like, and my parents really censored what we watched. Like, if it had magic in it, we weren't allowed to watch it. So I hadn't seen
Harry Potter.
no, definitely not Harry Potter,
crazy.
but no Little Mermaid,
That's
no
like the Bible
Aladdin,
times.
no any of that stuff. Well, it's the Bible now for us, but
Yeah, now we're big.
now I'm
Little
obsessed.
Mermaid.
Yeah. Mm-mm. So anything with any type of magic, because in the Bible it talks
But
about
even though that's
being
like an obvious
associated.
fake thing. I mean, Harry Potter, I'm like, okay, I guess they're trying to say there's like wizards, but
Yeah.
it's like it's a talking fish. I mean, it's just a funny cartoon, but no,
Yeah.
that was too far.
Yeah, because they really genuinely believe in because there's scripture in the Bible that talks about not being associated with any sorcery or witchcraft or whatever. So magic would be considered witchcraft, and they wouldn't like let that into the house.
Interesting.
I look back, and what's funny is that it's like we were worried about the Little Mermaid, and we should have been worried about so many other things.
Right.
Not that they knew, but it's just like, oh my God. So yeah, I forgot where I was going.
Yeah, that's okay. Have a little reset. I think just the lines. Yeah, you were just saying how when you're already trying to figure out puberty and all those things. I mean,
yeah,
it's quite confusing.
It is. So like 12, 13, 14 were, oh my God, just
Well, those are hell for anyone.
horrific.
If you have like, you're in the Brady Bunch.
Yeah,
You're the best family
that's
ever.
true.
Like 13 as a girl, you're like couldn't be worse. So to have, all that is.
Yeah. But now you can think through things a little bit differently, right? And I'm still struggling with fear. Like I still having a hard time sleeping at night and all of that. And then on top of that, now I have a better understanding of what happened, but I'm still like, it is buried deep, 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 deep. On top of now I'm having all of these other feelings of now I think, oh my God, like I do have demons. Because I am attracted to girls. And it's not this clear, right? Like in my 14-year-old brain, it was not this clear. It was just like, oh my God, something's wrong. Like there is something so deeply wrong with me. I don't think it can ever be repaired.
So and I want to talk kind of, I think even a whole nother episode about your involvement in the church and everything, but just for people who haven't heard that, I think, again, another thing that's common from people that we know or, have met or whatever is you kind of get outside of that part of your life and they're like, I was never into that. Like I was just going, to get by, not get grounded on Sunday or whatever. But I think it's important to know, like, you really were active. You really.
Oh, I genuinely believe.
Really believed all of that stuff. So
yeah.
When you start having these thoughts,
mm-hmm.
It's probably not your first reaction to think, why don't my parents support me?
No.
You're thinking more aligned with them, would you say? Like, you're like,
oh,
this
100%.
is really wrong.
Yeah. Which, there was such internal hatred and homophobia. Like the level of hatred that I had for myself ran deep for many reasons. But then as, around the 13, 14 age, especially, as I started to grow up even more, oh my God, it was like unbearable. Like I hated the way that I looked. I hated my body. I hated my feelings. I hated my interactions. Like I struggled in every way possible, but these were never things that we talked about. Never talked about this type of thing. I went to church. I played in the band. Like to an external looking in person, they would never know. They would never know any of this. And it, especially around that age, obviously you have hormones raging and everything else. And it just got to a point that I just thought, like, I think that my family would be better off without me. Like, and the world would be, because what type of a life am I supposed to live? Like, what type of future am I supposed to have? The fear of, I think one of the things that added just extremely heavily to the fear was because I was struggling so much with what, people would refer to as a sin. Every night when I would go to bed, I would think, oh my God, if I had these thoughts today and I don't ask for forgiveness, I'm going to, if something happens and I die, I'm going to go to hell. And there were crazy things in the church too. I've even mentioned this to you of like the Left Behind books and these stories about Revelation and the coming of Jesus. And then he takes everybody back to heaven for the first rapture. Like, that's a whole nother topic for another day. But yeah, I mean, it's crazy. And so like literally every night for years of my life, I would wait as long as I possibly could until I was about to go to sleep. And then I'd ask Jesus to come into my heart one more time, just in case we died, or just in case there was a rapture, because otherwise the last thing that would have been on my mind were some of these other feelings. I was doomed, really, from that. So I think that's probably when it started to develop. Like, it wasn't just like my parents don't support. It was that this is wrong, and God doesn't love me, and God doesn't support me, and God doesn't, they talk about it's like being an abomination, and like very strong language towards, that type of, or a type, of gay relationships and all of that different stuff. And honestly, it just got to a point where and this had just gone on for so many years that I just could not take it anymore. And so when I was 14, I did make an attempt on my life. And, thank God that did not turn out that way. But just to kind of give, no, I mean, it's heavy. And I just wish that, like, as the person I am now, I would give anything to be able to, and this is a lot of the work we do in therapy, right, that I've done for so long. Shout out to Emily. But, what would it be like if you could go back and hug yourself in that time and love yourself in that time? And what would it be like to be the person, needed? Because now, I mean, again, like, did my parents hug me? Yes, they hugged me. They were very affectionate. We said, I love you every night before bed. Like, we did all of those things. It was just, there were so many things going on, especially in the world of religion, that I just thought I could never come back from. And I think that that's really important, because I've heard people's stories who grew up in a similar type religion or church like I have. And they have similar stories, not about the same subject, but about just debilitating fear, and the fear of, not making it to heaven, or not living a holy life, or just like all these different things, and miss the fact. And I think it's missed in the world that we live in today, that God is love, and He's always been love, and He always will be. That love probably looks very differently than what I learned about growing up in church. And it looks very different than, my parents abandoning our relationship or walking away from our relationship. Although they would say I walked away from the relationship, so it's complicated who walked away.
I'll tell you.
Yeah, I know. But like, love looks very, very different than that. Yeah.
I just want to go back to kind of make a comment that you said about, giving yourself a hug at that time, which I think, even small things, you think you wish that, but I just can't imagine how much you would have needed that. Oh my gosh, I'm going to start sobbing. And I think, oh my gosh, even if, see? I got so, upset the microphone fell off, but I think that you do that every day for people. I think that's what you're doing with this exercise. I mean, if 5 people, and the 5 people are our siblings and our friends or whoever, 5, 50, 10, whatever, people listen to this podcast, I think that hearing your story is going to leave them a better person. Mm-hmm. It certainly has made me one. And, just kinder with your words and being on the lookout for when someone really needs you, but they can't ask for help. I mean, I wish that you could go back and give that to yourself, but I think that you give that to the people with whom you cross paths. I mean, every day.
Thanks, babe.
think
I
that's
appreciate
that's
that.
really amazing. And I also just want to say, I mean, it's so eye-opening what you say about religion and love and all that. I've told you this before, but I don't know that I would give my parents A pluses on everything. I think every parent makes mistakes, as we mentioned, but I actually would give them an A plus in kind of delivering, God's message or religion to me because, we did have it as a kid. I mean, I know, okay, I didn't read the whole Bible. I don't know what to say about it. I never read the Harry Potter books either. Okay, everyone. I'm not a big reader. Okay, I'm embarrassed. Stephanie, I'm sorry that you have to be friends with me and know that's the truth, but whatever. Okay, I'm not a big reader. But the message was always there. I mean, I've heard every single night before I go to bed. I do still now. If I'm having a bad day, if something really good happens, I mean, I do that. That's part of my everyday life. But it was just always taught to me as something that would just bring you comfort. Something just to have as a crutch. I absolutely never. Besides like big things, I can't murder or whatever. That's just obviously wrong. But
Yeah.
I never even knew that there was something to fear. So I can't imagine really having that.
Yeah. No, it's true. I think in talking about this, right, the biggest takeaway, and I have to remind myself this to this day, right, even after all of my experiences, that like you said, you don't know what's happening in someone's life. And especially right now, things can be extremely polarizing, and we have such contempt for people that, don't agree with us or that we don't agree with or that, yeah, I'll stop there.
That's for another episode.
Yeah, that I think the most significant thing that we can give to both ourselves and to other people is compassion, because you just really do not know what people are going through, and maybe they don't know how to ask for help, and maybe they don't know how to communicate it, and it's all of the little things that we do, like smiling at someone as we pass, or kindness that we exchange with people, that really make a really important difference. Yeah, I just think that's really, really important to remember. Hard to implement in a society that we live in right now, but extremely important. And I can't think of anything that's more like God than that.
Amen.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of people claiming to be messengers of God, but I think you see God in people's lives. Mm-hmm. You see, their compassion and their love and their generosity and their language and the way that they speak about people. You see that. That's very evident. And so I think that's a huge takeaway from this week, is just to have compassion for ourselves. I'm a lot better at having compassion for other people than I am at having compassion for myself.
Yeah, that's a hard one, right?
Yeah, but it's super necessary.
For sure.
And it has aided me in being able to really heal after all this time. So I know this was a heavy topic and a heavy subject, but I think it's important. There's a really high number of suicides, especially in the queer community. And I just think it's something that we need to talk about and need resources for. I think the Trevor Project is a great resource for people.
Locally, 1 in 10.
Locally, 1 in 10. Yeah. And we'll put some more resources on the website as well if you're needing those or know of someone that needs it. And let's just pay close attention to each other.
Yeah.
And deliver compassion whenever we can.
Thanks for sharing your story, babe.
Yeah, thanks for listening. Sorry to make you cry.
It's okay. I came prepared.
I think we only dropped one F-bomb in the episode too.
Oh, that's good. I didn't really have any jokes for this week. That's not the time.
Yeah.
Next week though, rapid fire.
Yeah. It's going to be fuck times 10. No. All right. Well, thanks
Thank
for
you guys
listening,
for
guys.
listening.